everybody. So I'm Laurence and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Pipedrive. In case you're asking yourself, who is Pipedrive? We're not a coffee maker, even if we sponsor your coffee cups. We're actually a sales management tool for scale-up companies. So I'm going to share with you the 7 years I've spent at LinkedIn and Pipedrive. And this is a very genuine story. So I'm going to share, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the journey started here, and it's a nice picture. It's actually a true picture. Those are my real toes. It was taken in Saint-Tropez in France, and that's where it started in the summer of 2010. When I received a call from an ex-AOL Time Warner colleague asking me if I was interested to take over marketing for LinkedIn in Europe. And you can imagine my reaction. Hold on. Ariel, I'm going to call you back. I need to think about it. So a few months later, because it took some time, I joined LinkedIn, and on paper, it was the dream job. At that time, LinkedIn was about 700 employees, across the world. We were 40 people in Europe. It was pre-IPO. Everything was to build. I was a builder, so I went full in. And I made, I was really, really committed to this challenge, which was actually a double challenge. I was called to do two things. First, to build the marketing organization in Europe and build it from scratch. There were two junior marketers. There was no process. There was no planning. And still very, very, very aggressive goals. But it was not only my job, it was also to launch LinkedIn in France, because they picked a French person because they wanted to tackle France. France at that time was the second largest market for LinkedIn in Europe. They had 2 million subscribers. It was 20%, considered as a tipping point, and they wanted to go more aggressively in France. So they were looking for someone with the right network and the right experience. So 2 jobs in one. But I'm a hard worker, so I said, I can do it. And again, I went full in. Lots of opportunities, as you can imagine, because even if LinkedIn was small, it was still one of the most promising Silicon Valley companies. So there were a lot of requests coming in from media, from partners, and everything was really, really interesting because LinkedIn was such a great brand that people would come with very, very interesting deals. So I started to scatter myself. I started to go after all the shining objects. And obviously, I was a little bit with this little guy, running everywhere and not really having the time to do interviews or to hire. So, no time to hire, no time to interview. And as you can imagine, this is not the right tactic. So it ended up pretty badly. So after a year, just a year, so summer 2011, I received an email from my boss, writing me from California and saying, Laurence, I'm flying over to London and I need to speak to you. Usually, when you receive this kind of email, it's not to share good news. When your boss flies from California, it's because he wants to tell you something he cannot tell on phone or on video. And that was obviously the case. He came and told me, listen, this is not working. I think that we made a mistake. You're probably not the right person. I don't see any impact. I don't see any results. Needless to say, I was pretty upset. I had worked literally my off. And I also felt that I was very close to the top of the mountain, which is interesting because, when you work very hard, you think it's going to work. Eventually it's going to work because I work very hard. And you tend to confuse working harder and working smarter. So I have a pretty big ego. So I said, okay, now I'm going to resign before you fire me. But I did something smart. I called my mentor first, and he managed to convince me to swallow my ego and try to earn back my job. And that's what I did. So I reflected, I stepped back, and I said, okay, like, what are the mistakes I made? So first, I probably bite off more than I could chew. And so, like, you know, you have an ego, and sometimes, like, a job is fantastic on paper, but, like, be realistic about what you can do. So I said, okay, like, maybe I should take, like, a smaller scope, and I gave up France. I moved to London, and I focused on marketing only. Then I said, okay, I scattered myself, like, maybe I need more focus. I call it the Nutella principle. So if you have a large spoon of Nutella, like, either you can spread it very thin on a big toast, and it won't taste anything, or you can just put it on a small piece of bread, and it will be a delight, and your dopamine will be on. So, you know, I said, okay, I'm going to better pick my battles, and I focused my attention on building the demand gen engine for talent solution, which was like the largest part of LinkedIn business in Europe at that time. I also started to hire, because, you know, when you don't hire, not only you end up doing like endless hours, but marketing has become a pretty complicated discipline, and you also end up out of your depth, because there are many things that, you know, you haven't learned or you can learn in a small amount of time. So I hired a team, and, you know, nearly 6 years later, it turned out to be, you know, a very, very good story. I spent almost 7 years at LinkedIn, got promoted to a senior marketing director, got to take over LATAM after EMEA, sat at the EMEA leadership team, had this absolutely wonderful team, and that brought me to the summer 2017, so last summer. I started to say, okay, like, this is a fantastic story, but, you know, I was kind of in my comfort zone again. Like, everything was working very well, hitting my numbers, team happy. And I said, maybe I need a new challenge. The problem with LinkedIn, it's a fantastic company, but it's US-based. And if I wanted to develop and take a bigger scope, I needed to move to the US, and that was not an option for me. So I started to talk to the market and look for another challenge. And I ended up with Pipedrive. So you may ask, why Pipedrive? So 3 things made me tick to join Pipedrive. So the first thing is the opportunity. You know, after being a senior marketing director at LinkedIn, I was looking for a CMO role, or at least like a VP role. And that was a CMO role that eventually became a chief revenue officer role because I took over sales in a very, very interesting company. So Pipedrive was founded in Estonia. Now it's headquartered in the US. So European-based or originated company. It's one of the fastest startups in Europe. We have over 70,000 customers across the world, and still doubling our revenue last year. So, like, still hyper-growing, obviously pre-IPO, and with everything to build. So fantastic opportunity. First mark, check. Second mark, the product. I'm a marketer. Like, I would not be able to market a product I don't like, or I would say I would not do it again, because I actually did it when I was at AOL. So not, like, I would never do that again, and, you know, I loved LinkedIn, so I was looking for a product I would really, like, believe in. When I first received the call about Pipedrive, I didn't know Pipedrive, and I was like, CRM? Ugh. Like, after a purposeful, like, company like LinkedIn where I help people find jobs? No, like, no way. Like, software, B2B, But actually, when I discovered the product, because you can try it for free, I had a sort of epiphany. I was sitting in the middle of the sales team at LinkedIn. They are using one of those very famous tools out there. And I saw that Pipedrive was actually solving exactly the pain that they were facing every day, because it's a sales pipeline management tool. And they were managing their pipeline on Excel spreadsheet. They were doing their forecast on Excel spreadsheet. And that was exactly what we could do for them. So I said, OK, they have a story. I started to do some research. So, you know, like the raving customer reviews and like the rankings, that I say, OK, I believe in this product. There is something to build. I'm in. And the third thing that made me tick is the team. I met with the founders. I met with the CFO. Very interesting mix. So the founders, like Timo, the CEO, started by being a door-to-door salesman in California. He's Estonian, but went to California when he was a student. So he knows what it means to sell. He knows the pain. And it was very interesting to have a value proposition where, like the story of the founders is so much embedded. And there is a whole philosophy behind Pipedrive. The CFO was also a very interesting lad. Like, I think he's one of the most impressive CFOs I've ever met, but still like a very, very funny guy who drinks probably 2 or 3 liters of Coke like every day. So fell in love with the team and I say, okay, I'm getting in. But this time I didn't want to make the same mistake that I made for LinkedIn. So first, I prepared myself. And when I say I prepare myself mentally and physically. So I retired to Chamonix, my favorite place in the world, and I did some hiking. I had a 4 weeks break. This is a real picture, and it's August 2nd, but it's above 4,000 meters, above 1,400 feet. So if you understand why I'm wearing this. So really get fit, because I knew it will be short nights, a lot of working hours. I also prepared myself mentally. So obviously, when you interview for this kind of role, you have to pitch, you have to know the company, so you do your homework. But this time, I could go further, because I had access, I was under NDA, so I had access to a lot of information. And my goal was to know as much as I could know before I met the people, before I was with the organization. So I did a lot of work and a lot of research around SaaS, and really focused on filling out the gap I had in terms of metrics or strategies and stuff like that. I also spent the first 2 weeks in Tallinn. This is Tallinn, by the way. Few people know it. It's a beautiful city, medieval city. And why did I do that? Because I had spent almost 15 years in North American company, and I assume I was a little bit biased. So I said, okay, let's spend some time with the team there and understand their mindset. And I did that. It was a very good idea because Estonian people are very proud. It's a very small country. It's the harbinger in terms of technology, a very interesting country. But people are also pretty blunt. That's the least I can say. So it was good that I spent some time there and show my face, because I was also opening the office in London, so needed also to show my face. This time I gave the priority to talent. And when I came to Pipedrive, I realized 2 things. First, there were a lot of missing functions. For some reasons, because the marketing team had moved from Tallinn to New York and then back from New York to Tallinn, some functions had disappeared. There was almost no more product marketing, there was no comms, there was no content team, so I had to rebuild those functions. So I really spent a lot of time on this. But the second thing I realized, which is an interesting one, and that's something that my career has taught me, is that the people you need at the beginning of the story are not necessarily the people you need to go to the next stage. And that's a very important point when you build and scale a marketing team. At the beginning of the story, when your startup is in their first year, you need what I call the Swiss knives. You need people who can do a little bit of everything, because you have a small team, you need to be scrappy, and you're exploring. But when you go, and when you need to scale, you need more specialists. And that's a tricky one, because what it meant is that I came there and I say, okay, there are people in the team who've done extremely well, we're extremely committed to Pipedrive, but they are not the right people to go to the next stage. And so that's why it's also very important that when you hire someone, don't commit to a career, a career in your company. Commit to long-term employability, but not necessarily in your organization. What you're bringing, and the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, has written a book about it. It's called The Tour of Duty. So make sure that when you hire someone, you promise them long-term employability, but not necessarily at your company, because their skill, their competence may not be needed a few years later. But you're going to accompany them, and you're going to make sure that, they will evolve and develop in their career the right way. And so I had to exit a few people. But I did it in a compassionate way, and I did it in a smart way, saying, okay, I can also mentor you for the next stage, and make sure that you learn or you get something from it. Another thing I did immediately when I joined Pipedrive is I built a biz ops function. Why? Because the SaaS business is pretty metrics driven. And we were not lacking metrics, lots of metrics, but where do you start? There is a lot of noise. And if you don't understand the metrics, if you don't measure, all you have is an opinion. And believe me, after almost 25 years in marketing, the marketing opinion doesn't stand very strongly in front of the finance opinion or the sales opinion. So I brought someone to help me figure out, what was happening. And so the BizOps function is really helping us measure. So we build a number of dashboards. We had some dashboards in Tableau, but it was super hard to understand, what was the big picture and the business impact. And we completely changed the way we plan, we prioritize. Especially when there are a lot of A/B testing, run at Pipedrive, because HubSpot, we do a lot of tests with everything. Another thing I realized when I joined Pipedrive was that there was a very big gap with the brand. So Pipedrive is a pretty self-explanatory brand. We help people manage or drive their pipeline, Pipedrive. But there were two things missing. First, we lost the link with the founder story. And it's a very powerful story, and there is a whole philosophy behind activity-based selling, and I think that was a pity, because you need something to stand out in this market, and also the whole way of communicating across channel was completely inconsistent. So I hired an agency to help us with the positioning work, and I'm very excited about what's coming soon. I won't unveil it today, but very nice things are coming our way. And obviously, probably the part that everyone is expecting, I had to tackle the growth engine. And so the growth, first, this graph is a little bit misleading. This is the worst situation when you ask a CMO to the rescue when your growth is actually, staggering. The issue that Pipedrive has grown extremely efficiently from a capital point of view. We've been very frugal, but obviously, at some point you see that organic is starting to occupy a smaller share. So that's where you need really to double down on performance marketing. So fortunately, I was called a little bit before that inflection point. So it's a three-band play. So organic is really the core engine. And as I said, a number of functions had faded out. So I had to rebuild those functions. So rebuilding the inbound engine, also looking at the top of the funnel. So really going deeply into the data, looking at the whole funnel, looking at the funnel per type of customer, looking at the funnel per country, and understanding where are the bottlenecks. And obviously, in the case of Pipedrive, very strong conversion rates. So it was mostly a top of funnel, challenge. So working, that's also why I hired a brand agency. So really doubling down on the brand and inbound marketing. Then you have paid marketing, and you have the core channels. And we live in a world where the market is dominated basically by two players, Google and Facebook. And it's an arms race. And some of our competitors are on steroids because they have very deep pockets. So it's a very, very tough market. And here, there are different ways to outsmart, your competitors. First, you can go very, very, very deep into paid marketing optimization. And that's what we're doing, because we also need to have some level of investment, at least to protect our brand. So here, it's really almost what I call yield optimization, to make a parallel with the flight, travel industry. And so we're looking we're literally optimizing our spend on a day-to-day basis across channels, across countries, even across days of the week, if there are holidays and things like that. So you can imagine the level of granularity of the data we need to dig into. And then you need to also outsmart competition by doing things differently. And so we're exploring a number of alternative strategies. Obviously, I mean, virality is one very important one. Like the most, the most viral you can become, and how you leverage user-facing features is also like how you can grow, being less dependent on those channels. And like we call them the moonshots. So like brainstorming with the team and doing some burst tests. So here the idea is sort of trial and error. So like to run like small tests in one isolated market where you go full in. You spend some decent money, but for a very short period of time, and you see what happens. And you gain a lot of time because, like we've spent, like especially at LinkedIn, I spent endless hours on the attribution model, trying to understand first click, second click, assisted, non-assisted. And yes, even if you have the best analysts in the room, it's super hard to prove. Where when you run like a test where you go full in terms of media spending, and you compare that with like not doing anything, like it's pretty obvious. Like you're going to see immediately what effect it has on all your channels. So a lot of work done around that. Another thing, it's not like super visible, but like many SaaS companies, we've been very obsessed with volume. Also because investors are expecting, like very high growth of customers. But there is probably an interesting play between volume and value. And if you think about it, especially in this kind of business, high velocity, very big volume, increasing the average revenue per customer has a far bigger effect than acquiring like thousands of additional customers. So we started to play with that. When I came to Pipedrive, the flagship offer was actually the entry offer, the silver offer. Because we say, okay, let's remove like the barriers to entry. And we said, okay, let's try to shift the focus to the mid-range offer. Also because when you attract a lot of people, like in the low end of the market, you also attract a lot of people who are, let's say, less sustainable. So like when you attract a lot of people who have very, very small businesses, they are more likely to go out of business. So we could see also a correlation with churn. So we refocus our attention to the mid-range of the market, and it worked out very well. So now, like we're making more money per customer, and that makes a big difference. What we realize also is that there is also an opportunity for a more balanced play between acquisition and customer marketing, because obviously with 70,000 customers, we have a pretty nice base to work on in terms of upgrade. And so we started to work on that. It's far easier to upgrade someone than to acquire a new customer. So 6 months in the job, and I've learned a number of things. First, the biggest learning for me was the nature of the business. Coming from LinkedIn, which is more like an enterprise sales, even if it's SaaS, it's still enterprise sales business. Here, Pipedrive, it's mass enterprise. So we're talking about a very large number of customers. So like similar to a mass market, but mass enterprise with smaller volume, and also the velocity of the business. Like my biggest learning is probably that every day matters. At LinkedIn, I would look at the data on a weekly or monthly basis. Here, I'm looking at the data on a daily basis and sometime on an early basis. I can tell you, looking at our signups and NPCs at the beginning of the day, like looking at the trend, the propensity model, if it's going to be a good or bad day. So like this level of velocity, I didn't have this experience before, so I learned it. The second thing I learned is that, I think it's a Bill Gates quote, is that you always tend to overestimate your short-term impact and underestimate your long-term impact. So I learned to be patient. And that's probably like the good part is that I'm still learning. But maybe the bad part is that, like you have to be patient and things sometimes takes a little bit longer than you expected. And the ugly part is that there are still things that you cannot control. And, like they happen and you have to cope with them. Like, Facebook increasing their tariffs like in a pretty big way at the end of 2017, or your competitors starting like to bid like crazy on your brand name, and your brand search cost like going like that. So that, that's the ugly part, but you have to cope with it. So if I had to leave you with a few tips, like those are the 6 tips I would like to share with you. So the first time when you take a new job, first be prepared. And again, be prepared like physically because those jobs are very intense. Like I'm literally like in and out today. I wish I could stay longer with you, but I have a very important meeting. I need to go back to central London. And my days are like that. It's crazy. So like physically, you have to be in shape. You have to be fit. But also mentally. Again, I would never hire someone who hasn't done a proper homework on our company or on our industry. Like you start, like you use the product, you go and interview customers. Like it's easy to find customers. Even if you're not like part of Pipedrive, you will always find like a friend who uses it and you understand what's their experience. And you go deep into the data. There is tons of data on the internet, like starting with Google Trends, like all the articles, SaaStock, like videos and everything. Make sure that you come like fully prepared. Then pick your battles. Again, if you're like scattering yourself too thin, you're going to die, you're going to burn out. And I picked the battle around brand, I picked the battle around product marketing, like moving this go-to-market from the low end to the mid-end, like the mid-end of the market. I picked the battle around the growth engine, like rebuilding the inbound growth engine, like make sure that you pick the right battles. Hire fast, fire faster. Talent is your #1 priority. So like never postpone an interview. I'm spending like endless hours doing interviews, but it's so important. And yes, you can make mistakes. Like trust your instinct. Actually, even like my LinkedIn colleagues would hate me for saying that because they build up like crazy interview processes. What I found out in the end is that your instinct rarely trumps you. And so trust your instinct because, like we have probation period. So if you make a mistake, well, like you just end it. And like one thing I've learned around my career is that when there is a doubt, there is no doubt. So don't wait to fire. Like fire fast. It will be better for you. It will be better for the other person. And make sure that you have like the really best talent in your team. Under-promise, over-deliver. Again, like we tend to overestimate our impact short-term and underestimate like the impact long-term. So like make sure that you make an impact. You need to make an impact. It's interesting. Some companies. My husband started at Amazon a few months ago, and Amazon tells you like we don't expect you to make any impact in the first year. So I don't know if it's really true. They may measure it, but it's interesting. I think that you still have to prove your value in the first 6 months. So pick your battles so you can move the needle. But make sure that you don't overpromise because if you disappoint your leadership team, it's not going to work very well. That's what happened to me at LinkedIn. Don't forget you're a marketer. Again, if I spend so much time on the brand, it's because it's a market of attention. And on performance marketing, you're the same arena that everybody, and like we all fight with almost the same weapons. So what's going to make the difference is your brand, like it's your DNA. So like make sure that you invest the right time into that. And my last advice is make your friends close and your enemy closer. That's a quote from The Godfather. Your friends, usually it's sales, because marketing and sales, like some people may think like they don't get along so well, but actually it's the same funnel. For me, it's easy because I also lead sales. Your enemy usually is the CFO because you're the biggest spender in the company. So make sure that you're not reacting to your CFO questions. Like there is nothing worse than having your CFO telling you like, I don't understand, your conversion rate dropped, and like you're learning it from him. So make sure that you talk the same language, which means that in the end, when you're a CMO, you're a little bit of a CFO because you really need to be on top of your numbers. You're a little bit of a CTO because you need to understand the stack, and especially with growth hacking, it becomes pretty technical. I have an engineering team. I have the luck to have an engineering team, but sometimes you go like pretty deep into the technology. You're a CHRO because, again, talent is your #1 priority, and you need to manage the entire cycle and also guarantee this long-term employability to your team. And you still have to be a marketer. So I hope this is useful. I think I have to run, like I don't know exactly, yeah. Like I have a hard stop, unfortunately. I'm sure there are questions, like I'm committed to answer the questions, but probably online. So I will catch up with Alex, and I hope you will find this as useful as I found it, as I lived through it.